Imagine growing up in a house where money has never been discussed at the dinner table. Not because there isn't any, but because discussing it is considered vulgar. Where your great-great-grandfather's name is on a university building. Where you summer in a place that doesn't have tourists. Now imagine growing up in that house with a sibling and a cousin and a trust fund that isn't quite as large as you thought it was, and parents who never told you exactly what you would inherit, or when, or whether your brother might get more. Welcome to the world of old money. From the outside, it looks like serenity, elegance, and order. From the inside, it is one of the most quietly competitive environments on Earth. Today, we're going deep inside the hidden rivalries, the unspoken contests, and the slow, deliberate battles for position, inheritance, and legacy that play out across generations of wealthy families. Battles fought not with shouting, but with silence, not with lawsuits, but with invitations, not with aggression, but with perceived excellence. This is the silent competition inside old money families, what we mean by old money. Before we get into the competition, we need to understand what old money actually means. Because it's not just about having a lot of wealth. New money families can be richer. What defines old money is something else entirely: time, culture, and institutional belonging. Old money typically refers to generational wealth that has persisted across at least 3 generations, often far more. Think the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the DuPonts, the Rothschilds, the Astors, the Cecils in Britain, the Medicis in their time, and countless less publicized families who have held land, capital, and influence quietly for over a century. Sociologists use the term the established wealthy to distinguish them from the newly rich. In his landmark 1956 work, The Power Elite, C. Wright Mills described old money families as the core of what he called America's upper class. Not just rich people, but a social class with its own institutions, rituals, and reproduction mechanisms. What separates old money from new money isn't just wealth, it's habitus, a term introduced by French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. Habitus is the deeply internalized set of dispositions, tastes, manners, and assumptions that a person carries from their upbringing. Old money children are raised with a habitus that marks them as belonging to a particular world: understated clothing, specific recreational tastes, sailing, polo, fox hunting, classical music, a particular accent or diction, and, crucially, a deep familiarity with social codes that are never written down. This is also what makes the competition inside these families so invisible to outsiders. The arenas of contest are things that barely register to most people. Who was invited to the house in the Berkshires? Who was mentioned in the patriarch's remarks at the family dinner? Whose child attends the right school? Who serves on the board of the family foundation? These are the games. They are played without scoreboards. The architecture of the competition. So, how does the competition actually work? Let's break down the architecture, the invisible structures that produce it. The estate and the inheritance question. At the heart of almost every old money family dynamic is an unresolved question: who gets what and when? Old money families rarely divide their wealth equally among children. The reasons are practical and historical. Divided estates lose their power. A family that splits 100 acres 4 ways in every generation is a family that loses its land in 3 generations. This was understood deeply by English aristocracy, which developed primogeniture, the system of the eldest son inheriting everything, specifically to prevent the fragmentation of noble estates. American old money rarely practices formal primogeniture anymore, but the logic still operates, often informally. Patriarchs and matriarchs often concentrate wealth. One child might receive the family business, another the property, another a smaller financial inheritance. How these decisions are made and how much family members know about them in advance varies enormously, and the uncertainty itself is fuel for competition. Researchers studying high net worth estate planning have documented what family therapists call the inheritance anxiety complex, a pervasive, rarely spoken anxiety among wealthy adult children about what they will receive, whether they are favored, and what they must do or appear to do to secure their position. The competition, in other words, begins before the patriarch dies. The role of approval. In old money families, the primary currency of the competition isn't money itself, it's approval. Specifically, the approval of the family's matriarch or patriarch, or in multi-generational families, the approval of the elder generation as a whole. This approval is dispensed through subtle signals: who is consulted on family decisions, who is invited to certain private gatherings, whose children are mentioned proudly to family friends, who is spoken of as understanding what this family is about. Conversely, disapproval is communicated through omission: a sibling who isn't mentioned, a cousin whose children are not enrolled in the family's favored school, an adult child who went off in an interesting direction, which is old money code for disappointed us. One of the most famous documented examples of this dynamic is the Vanderbilt family. Cornelius Vanderbilt II accumulated one of the greatest fortunes in American history, but the family's descent into fragmented wealth and faded relevance within 2 generations is a case study in what happens when inheritance decisions are handled opaquely and family members compete destructively for the patriarch's favor. Gloria Vanderbilt's memoirs detail a childhood marked by proxy battles between wealthy relatives for control, not just of money, but of identity. Soft competition versus hard competition. It's important to distinguish between 2 modes of competition that coexist in old money families. Hard competition is the more visible kind: legal battles over wills, disputes over the family business, siblings who stop speaking. These exist. Families like the Redstones, the Pritzkers, and the Bancrofts, owners of the Wall Street Journal before its sale, have all seen spectacular public versions of hard competition that ended up in courts or boardrooms. But for most old money families, hard competition is considered a failure, a loss of decorum, a scandal, an airing of dirty laundry. Old money culture pathologizes open conflict. The ideal is the appearance of unity and grace. This is why soft competition is far more common and far more psychologically interesting. Soft competition is the performance of excellence, virtue, and family loyalty, calibrated to impress the right people. It includes raising children who embody the family's values, marrying well, maintaining the right affiliations, achieving in approved fields, and being present at the right moments without appearing to try too hard. The genius of soft competition is that it can never be called out. You cannot accuse a sibling of competing when all they've done is serve on the right charity board, mention their child's acceptance to Princeton, and volunteer to organize the family reunion. But everyone at the table knows exactly what is happening. The siblings, frontline warriors. In a polite war, siblings in old money families occupy a uniquely complex position. They are raised together in privilege, bound by shared history and genuine affection, and they are also each other's primary rivals, for resources, approval, and legacy. Psychologists who study sibling dynamics in high-wealth families, including researchers at the Williams Group, a wealth consulting firm that has studied the failure of intergenerational wealth transfer, note several recurring patterns. The golden child versus the shadow. In many wealthy families, one child emerges early as the presumptive heir, the one who shows the most promise in the family's terms. The right interests, the right temperament, the right performance in school. This child receives more attention, more investment, and often more preparation for eventual leadership of family affairs. They are the golden child. The shadow is the sibling who does not claim this role. The shadow may be equally capable, often more so, but either chose a different path or simply was not assigned the role. The shadow often spends decades in a subtle competition to redefine the terms of excellence, to prove that their path, a creative career, a different kind of achievement, a chosen lifestyle, is also worthy of family recognition. What makes this dynamic so potent in old money families is the time scale. Because wealth transfers happen across decades, trusts don't fully vest until certain ages, estates are managed for years before distribution. The competition can last 40 or 50 years. Children become middle-aged, then elderly, still operating under the evaluative gaze of a parent or the family as an institution. Marriage as a competitive move. In old money families, whom you marry is never purely a personal matter. It is understood, sometimes explicitly, always implicitly, that marriage carries social weight. The right partner demonstrates good judgment, maintains standards, and alignment with family values. The wrong partner signals instability, poor taste, or a troubling independence. Historically, this was formalized in practices like the social register, the American Directory of Acceptable Elite Families, first published in 1886, which essentially functioned as a marriage market guide for the upper class. Today, while the social register still technically exists, its function has been replaced by more informal networks. The right prep schools, the right clubs, the right neighborhoods, the right summer communities. Marrying someone from a comparable or better situated family is still considered, in many old money circles, a form of success. And conversely, a sibling who marries down into new money, or into a family with no money, or into a family from an entirely different social world, often finds themselves navigating a subtle shift in family standing that has nothing to do with their own character and everything to do with old money's essentially tribal nature. The prodigal versus the loyal another persistent pattern is what family therapists call the prodigal-loyal axis. One sibling stays close, geographically, professionally, emotionally, to the family center of gravity. They work in the family business, live in the ancestral city, show up to every family gathering, and are visibly embedded in the family's social world. This is the loyal sibling. The other sibling leaves to make their own life, find their own identity, pursue something the family would not have chosen. This is the prodigal. Here is where it gets complicated. In old money families, leaving is often the more respected move, even as it is the more dangerous one. Old money culture values self-possession and genuine achievement. A sibling who built something independently is often regarded in the long run with more genuine admiration than one who simply stayed and managed the inheritance. But the prodigal takes a risk. If they fail, or if they drift too far from the family's world, they may return to find that the loyal sibling has accumulated all of the relational capital, the trust, the consultation, the quiet assurances about what the will contains. The cousins, the second ring of competition. Sibling competition is intense, but it is only the inner ring. In truly old money families, those with 3, 4, or 5 generations of accumulated wealth, the real complexity is in the cousin network. As wealth is divided and redivided across generations, cousins become the primary social unit of the extended family. And among cousins, the competition takes on an almost anthropological quality, because cousins are close enough to be compared, but distant enough that the competition rarely carries the emotional charge of sibling rivalry. Branch competition. In multi-generational wealthy families, the family organizes itself into branches, each descended from a different child of the original wealth creator. These branches quietly rank themselves and are quietly ranked by others. The branch that produced the most distinguished heirs, the senator, the philanthropist, the decorated military officer, carries more prestige. The branch that produced the least distinguished heirs, the ne'er-do-wells, the addicts, the scandalous divorces, carries less, and branches are intensely aware of their relative standing. This produces a branch-level competition played out through the children. Our branch produces successful people. Their branch produces problems. Children absorb this framing early and understand their role as representatives of branch reputation. Institutional markers as scorecards. Because old money competition cannot be openly acknowledged, it is tracked through what sociologists call institutional markers, affiliations, memberships, and achievements that carry social meaning in the elite world. The scorecard includes which prep school, Exeter versus Andover versus somewhere less distinguished, which college, ideally the family's legacy school, ideally with distinction, which clubs, the Knickerbocker in New York, the Somerset in Boston, White's in London, which charitable boards, which geographic communities, the Hamptons versus somewhere newer, and which professional roles. Children are measured against these markers constantly, not always consciously, but reliably. A family reunion is never just a reunion. It is an evaluation. Everyone is registering where everyone else's children ended up, who went to what school, who married whom, who has a house where. The information is collected and processed through the family's internal ranking system, which everyone understands and no one discusses. The family foundation as arena one of the most sophisticated arenas for old money competition. In recent decades is the family foundation, the philanthropic organization through which many wealthy families channel both charitable work and family identity. Foundations serve many purposes. They are tax-efficient vehicles for wealth management. They maintain the family's social prestige, and they project values. But they are also profoundly political. Who sits on the board of the family foundation? Who directs its strategy? Who represents it publicly? These are questions of enormous importance in the family's internal hierarchy. The Rockefeller Family Foundation, one of the oldest and most influential in American history, offers a visible example of how foundation governance becomes a proxy for family governance. Various branches of the Rockefeller family have spent decades navigating questions about the direction, leadership, and mission of family philanthropic institutions that are simultaneously about values and about power. The psychological cost. We've been describing the competition from the outside, its structures, arenas, and players. But what does it feel like from the inside? What does it cost? The performance of effortlessness. One of the most psychologically demanding aspects of old money life is the requirement to appear effortless. Old money culture despises visible striving. New money people work hard and talk about it. Old money people work hard and never ever let it show. The ideal is sprezzatura, an Italian Renaissance concept describing the art of making difficult things appear easy, but maintaining this performance of effortlessness while simultaneously competing intensely for approval is extraordinarily taxing. It requires constant self-monitoring. Am I trying too hard? Am I appearing to want this? Have I violated the code of inscrutability? Therapists working with clients from high-wealth families report that this pressure produces a distinctive kind of psychological distress, what some call gilded cage syndrome, a combination of privilege guilt, identity confusion, and performance anxiety that is genuinely debilitating but almost impossible to discuss because it sounds like complaining about abundance. Identity without achievement. One of the deepest tensions in old money family life is between the family's identity, which comes from the original wealth creator's achievement, and the individual heir's need to forge their own identity. Old money families are typically identified by a founding achievement: the company, the invention, the political dynasty, the land grant. Every heir lives in the shadow of that founding achievement. This creates a specific kind of existential pressure. The heir must achieve enough to be credible, to demonstrate that they are a worthy steward of the family's legacy. But they cannot achieve so much in the same field that they appear to be competing with the founder's memory. And they must navigate this while appearing not to think about any of it. Psychologists have documented this in studies of third-generation wealth, the grandchildren of wealth creators, who are statistically the most likely generation to struggle psychologically. They have enough distance from the founding achievement to feel its weight without having the direct connection to it that their parents had. They are expected to represent something they didn't create in a world that has largely moved on from the context that made the creation possible. The silence itself. Perhaps the most insidious cost is the silence that old money culture imposes on exactly these struggles. Because old money doesn't discuss money, and doesn't display competition, and doesn't acknowledge anxiety, the people living inside these systems have almost no language for what they're experiencing. Family therapists working in this space note that clients from old money backgrounds often take years to develop the vocabulary to describe their own experiences because the culture they grew up in actively discouraged the introspective language needed to process those experiences. "We didn't talk about feelings in my family," is a sentence therapists hear constantly, and in old money families, it carries a specific weight. Feelings are considered a form of weakness, and weakness, in a family defined by its position, is the one thing you cannot afford to show. When the competition becomes catastrophic, the silent competition usually remains underground, but sometimes the pressure builds to a point of fracture, and the results can be dramatic. The Williams Group, a California-based wealth consulting firm, conducted a landmark study of intergenerational wealth transfer and found that 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation, and 90% lose it by the third. Their research identified the number one cause: family breakdown driven by unresolved conflict and miscommunication. This isn't primarily about bad investment decisions. It's about families that never learned to talk honestly about money, about fairness, about what they wanted and feared. The silent competition, left unaddressed, eventually erupts. Consider the Pritzker family, founders of the Hyatt hotel chain and one of America's wealthiest dynasties. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, a younger generation of Pritzkers filed lawsuits against older relatives, alleging that trust structures had been arranged to benefit some branches over others. The litigation dragged on for years and resulted in a reorganization of the family's enormous holdings. The quiet competition had become a very public war. Or consider the Bancroft family, heirs to Dow Jones and Company and publishers of the Wall Street Journal for over a century. By 2007, family governance had deteriorated to the point that various branches could not agree on a strategy. Individual members had wildly different relationships to the family business, and the family ultimately sold to Rupert Murdoch, an outcome that many family members later said they bitterly regretted, but which became inevitable once trust within the family had collapsed. In both cases, the root cause was decades of unaddressed competition, the silent accumulation of grievances, misread signals, and unsaid things that eventually became impossible to contain. What it looks like, when it works, it would be unfair and inaccurate to suggest that old money competition always ends in disaster. Some families navigate it with extraordinary sophistication, developing governance structures, family constitutions, and communication practices that channel competitive energy productively. The best functioning old money families tend to share several characteristics. They have explicit family governance, formal mechanisms, family councils, regular family meetings, sometimes third-party facilitators for making decisions about shared assets, resolving disputes, and ensuring that all branches have voice. They practice transparency about inheritance, not necessarily full disclosure of every number, but clear communication about the principles that will govern wealth transfer, so that family members aren't competing for an outcome they can't even clearly define. They have honored multiple paths to excellence in families where there is genuine cultural space for different kinds of achievement, where the child who became an artist is as respected as the child who took over the business. The competition is less corrosive because no one is fighting over a single definition of success. And they maintain genuine emotional connection. The families that survive across generations tend to be those where people actually like each other, where the shared identity is built on genuine affection and shared values, not just shared assets. This sounds obvious, but it is in practice rare and difficult. It requires exactly the kind of emotional honesty that old money culture traditionally suppresses. The Rothschild family, probably the most successful multi-generational wealth dynasty in modern history, having maintained cohesion and relevance across nearly 250 years and multiple continents, credits its longevity partly to a founding principle articulated by Mayer Amschel Rothschild himself: Concordia, Integritas, Industria, Unity, Integrity, Industry. The 5 sons who built the family's European network maintained communication and mutual loyalty in a way that was genuinely unusual for the era. The competition among them was real. Each managed a different national branch, but it was channeled into collective success rather than individual dominance. The silent competition inside old money families is, at its core, a deeply human story. Strip away the estates and the trusts and the portraits in oil, and what you have are people trying to be seen, trying to prove their worth to the people whose opinion matters most to them, trying to establish that their life has meaning and value, and that they have honored whatever they were given. The wealth changes the stakes. The culture changes the language. The silence changes the damage. But the desire underneath, the need to compete, to be recognized, to leave something behind, is as old as families themselves. What distinguishes old money is not that the competition is more intense than in other families. It's that it is perfected, refined over generations into something almost invisible, something that happens in the language of invitations and omissions and careful mentions, in the architecture of trusts and the geography of summers, in the question of whose portrait hangs at eye level in the hall. The competition is silent, but if you know how to listen, it is deafening. If you found this video interesting, consider exploring our deep dives on the old money mindset that keeps them rich for generations, how old money families raise their children, why 90% of family fortunes disappear in 3 generations, the difference between old money and new money. Subscribe and ring the bell. We go deep on topics most channels won't touch.